Good morning, guys. Welcome to my unboxing and review of the RE100 Vigna Zirah. This is a 2019 premium Bandai exclusive release that I got for $52, which does seem about right for the RE100 line, which normally sits around the kind of mid-40s to low $50 range, at least here in the States. So this is, of course, going to be a model of the Vigna Zirah, which in universe was developed as a sister unit alongside the Vigna Ghina. So while the Vigna Ghina was kind of an all-rounder mobile suit with a very typical arsenal of sword, board, beam rifle, and a beam bazooka with a high mobility backpack, this kind of slides the dial more towards the offensive end of the spectrum, with the main feature of the suit, of course, being the Vespers that you see prominently featured on the box art here. So I think in lore, the Vespers are noted to be very similar to the RX F91 Silhouette Gundams, which, if you don't know, is the Anaheim version of the F91 Gundam based on stolen data that they got from SNRI from the, I think, Mission Pack V type, the Vesper prototype F90 Gundam. But yeah, this is of course going to have the Vespers as the main unique feature of the unit alongside the Vigna Ghina's base arsenal of a sword, board, and beam rifle. It does not come with the beam bazooka, I don't believe. While in universe it was a sister unit to just the Vigna Ghina, in our world and model kit form, this is of course going to be heavily based on a combination of parts from the Vigna Ghina and the Vigna Ghina II, with which it shares a color scheme being, I believe, black and bright red. And while the Vigna Ghina II had some Vesper-like structures on the back that acted like boosters / stabilizers for like AMBAC maneuvering and things like that, they were not functional as Vespers like this kit is. So I am excited to see how this will look in different poses and things, and especially how it will look with these kind of deployed slightly different Vespers compared to the F91, whose design I really like. So of course, getting right into it now, and the box art here is of course in very typical P-Bandai fashion. This is just going to be an edited version of one of the promo images that they had put up on P-Bandai showing the Vigna Zirah here deploying the Vespers in a monochrome red, of course, which is going to be the main armor tone of the unit. So of course, again, in very typical P-Bandai fashion, as you can see, there's going to be basically nothing on the sides of the box. So let's get right into it. Inside the box, you get 8 bags of runners, which is going to be fairly typical being an RE100 kit. This can be expected to be a little bit more simple than a modern FM kit or something like that, but it should still be a fairly satisfying build. Of course, in addition to those bags, you will be getting this standard style RE100 manual here with the promo image of the Vigna Zirah here from the box art with the edited background in full color, looking quite nice right there with all of this very nice separated color detail, which hopefully is color separated in the box, but we will see. And then of course on the back, you will be getting your water slide decal guide, which should enhance a lot of the geometry and detailing of the Vigna Zirah and really give it a full complete package. And you can see one of the gimmicks of the Vigna Zirah here, where it comes with 2 different heads. It comes with the standard head, very similar to the Vigna Ghina, and it comes with a Gundam style head, complete with a dual eye sensor and a V-fin. Then of course you get your color guide down here in both English and Japanese in full color. This is going to be a relatively simple kit color-wise, only coming in 5 different colors. Of course on the inside here, you will be getting your parts list here, and it looks like we are not going to be using a bunch of parts from the Vigna Ghina 1 and 2 runners, and of course this is going to be using polycaps. You get a simplified build order here, very typical. You go torso, head, arms, waist, legs, backpack, and then arsenal. So of course, starting with your chest, yeah, very much in RE100 fashion, this is going to build up like a simplified high grade. You can see relying heavily on polycaps for articulation, as you can see here in the lower torso, and a lot of the parts are just going to be 2 halves sandwiched together. There is going to be some layering in the torso to give some color separation, but we will see how color accurate it is. Then of course you build up your torso, layer the collar there with some really nice power piping detail molded in, and then you layer some like vent detailing underneath to color separate that part, which should look pretty nice. You get into your head here, which relies on a polycap for the bottom for articulation, but apart from that builds up actually fairly close to the way a master grade head would, with plenty of nice layering. Of course, this is going to be the standard Vigna Ghina style head with the visor. And then on the back here, if you want to build the Gundam type head, you start here with this set. So it does look like it's not going to be super easy to swap between the 2 configurations. I will see if it comes with duplicate parts to build up. But if it doesn't, then I'm probably just going to build up the standard visor head. If it seems simple enough to swap the heads, then I'll do so in the video. Then you get into your arms, which does build up in very typical high-grade fashion. These joint parts are just 2 parts sandwiched together with a polycap in between to facilitate articulation. You get some minor frame detailing here for the elbows and things like that. Build up your shoulders, which is going to have plenty of like nice parts layering for detailing for power piping and things like that, which should look pretty nice. Then of course assemble your full arm, including your hands here. Then get into the left arm. Then of course you assemble your upper body, and it does look like the arm is going to be using a kind of locking system to stop them from popping out, which is nice. Then you build up your waist unit, which is going to have a nice hip swing there. It looks like some of the details in the skirts are going to be pretty poorly color separated, as you can see from this rather large thruster detail there. That needs to be applied with a color correcting sticker. Of course, you build up the rest of your waist, then you move on to your legs, which does look like, again, it's going to have some nice layering in the feet and things like that, but the overall assembly with the frame and things like that is going to be relatively simple. You get some very nice large thruster details there on the sides of the legs, kind of sandwich the two parts together, tons of hollow spaces in between, everything you would expect from an RE100 model. Then you build up your left leg, fully assemble the lower body, including the side skirts with some really large color correcting stickers there. Then of course you fully assemble your Vigna Zirah and then move on to the backpack with the VSBRs. So the VSBRs look like they are largely going to be two halves that sandwich together, and then you layer on some various parts for all of the kind of thruster and ventilation details all over the sides of the VSBRs, which should look quite nice fully assembled onto the model. Then of course you connect the two onto a center kind of thruster backpack unit and then attach it to the Vigna Zirah. Then you get into your weapons here, consisting of, I'm pretty sure that's the Vigna Ghina's beam rifle and two beam sabers. And then once you assemble your beam rifle, which did look like it was going to be very simple for the assembly, it's just talking about how to equip your beam sabers there with reassembling the hand around the beam saber handle, very typical, being able to mount the beam sabers onto a rack in the back skirt, and then talking about equipping the beam shield down there. And then, of course, talking about swinging down the VSBRs, kind of flipping up the handle, and then having the Vigna Zirah kind of articulate and use the VSBRs there, which you're definitely going to be seeing in the posing section. So yeah, this should be a fairly quick but still relatively satisfying build. As for the contents of the bags, you will get 17 runners inside the bags alongside this relatively large color correcting sticker sheet, coming with some of the details you would expect, such as metallic stickers for the eyes, the inside of the visor for the standard style head, some various sensor details for head cameras and cameras for the beam rifle and the, I believe, the VSBRs and things like that. But you will also have a ton of color correcting stickers for sub-thruster details on the skirts there, some large yellow stripe details there, some large gray stripe details there. So a little bit disappointed that these are included in the box. I'm probably going to end up just repainting these parts in myself. And of course, in addition to those, this will be coming with a really nice water slide decal sheet, coming with a lot of the usual and some extras, including a bunch of different marking and warning decals here, some decals for the crossbone vanguard, and some very large like white stripes and things like that. That should look really nice and really help a lot of the details on the kit pop. As for the runners themselves, so starting as usual with the polycaps, this is going to be coming with runner PC210 here for a set of 1/100 scale polycap joints for all across this kit. So I believe this is going to be the same runner that came in the RE100 gun cannon detector that I took a look at on this channel earlier this year, and it should work okay for facilitating articulation, but I am a little bit worried because the gun cannon detector, partially because of proportions, partially because of the RE100 frame, did have some rather poor articulation. So I am a little bit worried when it comes to the Vigna Zirah here, which is very much a high mobility suit that you kind of need to have good articulation to be believable in various poses, but we will see once the kit is fully built. So these runners were printed in June of 2025, starting with runners A1 and A2 here from the RE100 Vigna Ghina II. With a runner design date of 2019, this is going to be multicolored runners coming in 3 different colors, runner A2 of course being a copy of this top part of A1, with a bold red here for the main armor tone of the kit, with a number of parts for things like the arms, parts for, I think, the skirts, parts for the back skirt there, parts for the torso, the lower torso, etc. We will be getting a dark primer frame gray here for a number of auxiliary parts for things like the inner frame parts of the torso, some ventilation framing details, some power piping, a part for the head, the inner frame parts of the skirts, some thruster details, etc. And then you will be getting a small yellow runner here for some accent parts for like small ventilation sub details and things like that. You will get 2 of runner B2 from the RE100 Vigna Ghina with a runner design date of 2018, coming in a nice red here for our beam sabers, as well as armor parts primarily for the feet. You will get 2 of runner B4 here from the RE100 Vigna Ghina, containing some joint and armor parts, mainly for the joints for the shoulder. I think these are going to be parts for the tops of the legs going into the hips, and you get some armor parts for the arms over there. 2 of runner C1 from the RE100 Vigna Ghina, coming in a primer frame gray for a number of ventilation and thruster details. So it looks like the yellow insides of all of those sub-thruster details and things like that you are going to have to paint in yourself, which is a little unfortunate but not entirely unexpected. Runners D1 and D2 here in a primer frame gray from the RE100 Vigna Ghina. Going to be a number of frame and joint parts for all across this kit. You see parts for things like the sides of the legs, some frame parts for things like the elbows, the hips, your holding hands over there. You see inner frame parts for like the skirts, etc. So getting into some new runners for the Vigna Zirah, you get runners G1 and G2 with this kind of top part of the runner shared between them, going to be in a primer frame gray for a number of frame and joint parts for the Vigna Zirah. You get parts for, like the V-fins for the Gundam style head there, you get the collar for the torso, some inner frame parts for the skirts, so we're probably not going to be using the other ones you saw earlier, some frame parts for things like the tops of the legs going into the hips, so yeah, probably not going to be using that either. And you get the parts for the Vespers over here and the beam rifle up here. So yeah, the beam rifle does look like it is going to be a new mold for the Vigna Zirah. So I think while it looks similar to the one used by the Vigna Ghina, it's not entirely identical. But yeah, a lot of interesting parts on this runner. Went a little bit out of order there. So runners F1 and F2 here in a bold red. Also new for the Vigna Zirah, going to be all of the new armor parts seen across the Vigna Zirah. Mainly you see the large exterior parts for the Vespers back there. You see some parts for the feet over here. You see some detailing that are going to go on the sides of the Vespers there. You see, I think these are new kneecaps. You see new parts for, I think, the arms, some new parts for the legs, a new part for the torso, new parts for the head all over here. So it does look like you are going to be getting duplicate parts depending on if you want to use the standard head or the Gundam V-fin style head. So hopefully that means that you should be able to swap the parts out relatively easily. So it looks like you are going to have some new head molds here for the auxiliary antennas over here to kind of attach onto the sides of, and you get two different kind of central head parts here, one for the Gundam style head, one for the standard style head. Runner H in a clear blue, you get two parts on this runner for the eyes and head camera of the head. Of course, you get two parts here. Part 1 is going to be for the Gundam style head, part 2 is going to be for the standard visor head. And of course, lastly, you will be getting runner SB19 here for your beam saber effect parts. You'll be getting two 1/100 beam saber effect parts here in a clear pink, and of course you will be getting the beam shield effect part over here, because of course a lot of the late UC mobile suits don't use physical shields, they use beam ones, so you'll see this in the posing section. So yeah, plenty of parts all across those runners. A lot of them aren't going to be used, but they should still be able to be fairly satisfying. I am a little bit treading a lot of the detail painting I'm going to have to do to get the insides of the thrusters in yellow and things like that, but I'll see you after the build. Alright, welcome back. Here's the RE100 Vigna Zirah snap-built panel lined, decaled up with the included water slide decals, lightly painted and top-coated with Mr. Hobby Premium Flat Top Coat. I have it here configured with the Gundam style head with the Dark Tiger Squad emblem on it. Later on in the posing section, I'm going to swap the head to the standard Vigna Ghina style head, which I like a lot more than that, with the Crossbone Vanguard logo on it. The logo is also going to be on the back of the right shoulder as the spins are, just so you can see what that looks like. So getting right into the build for the RE100 Vigna Zirah is pretty typical of what you would expect from the RE100 line, but a little bit nicer in my opinion. While much of the inner frame is rather lacking on this kit, there's plenty of parts layering and parts separation on this kit, particularly in the exterior and the armor. There were many parts of this kit that were actually parts separated that I was not expecting to be parts separated, which is quite nice, namely things like the power piping details in the shoulders, the color separated yellow thruster details also in the shoulders, things like the gray venting in the front of the skirts being separate, the gray thrusters in the front of the knees being separate, the tiny little sub-thrusters on the sides of the calves, all being part separated, made for a surprisingly satisfying build experience that I wasn't entirely expecting going into this. While this kit is fairly simple for a 1/100 scale kit in terms of the build, it's definitely less involved than something like modern FM kits. This kit is still plenty enjoyable as far as the build goes, even though you can put it together fairly quickly in the better part of a day. And this kit doesn't really hold up in terms of complexity in the frame as you would expect from the RE100 line. Frame and parts like the arms is very lacking. I'm pretty sure the frame in the arms is literally 3 parts, and the rest of it is polycaps and 2 parts that sandwich together for the exterior armor. Now, the use of polycaps in this kit is a little bit annoying in certain areas, but for the most part it is fine. Really, the only parts where I found it's been an issue so far, I haven't recorded the posing section yet, so we'll see if my opinion changes, but in the legs in particular, the connection from the joint that goes from the top of the thigh into the hip isn't the greatest, and while the connection from that joint into the hip is fine, the peg that goes down into the leg does not fit all that snugly, and I did find that the leg popped off of that peg very easily as you articulated the kit. Even while I was just kind of bending the legs a little bit outward to get maximum coverage while I was top coating this kit, it popped out very easily, which I was not expecting, so that is a little bit of an issue with this kit. I was also very surprised that this kit doesn't really suffer from that many balance issues, particularly with the large backpack with the Vespers on them. I was expecting this kit to be a bit back heavy, but no, this kit can balance fine. The polycaps are not an issue there. Apart from a bit of looseness with the legs popping off of the peg on the joint going into the hip, the polycaps weren't that much of an issue, and there aren't really many stability issues on this kit. While the build of this kit in terms of the frame is fairly streamlined, the layering on the armor does make up for it in my opinion, and I do consider this build to be rather pleasant. So of course, coming back to a spinning in the booth, getting into aesthetics now, I will of course talk about any color correcting stickers that I used on this kit, any details you will need to paint in yourself before I will get into my opinions on this design. So I did not end up using most of the color correcting stickers on this sheet. I only used the metallic metallic ones for sensors and things like that, and a couple of these small color correcting stripe details that just kind of fit into spaces, because most of the color correcting stickers need to be pressed into details or folded around geometric details that would look pretty bad and would be pretty awkward to put on, so I just opted to paint those in myself. So getting into the sticker sheet then, sticker 1 is of course going to be the black and metallic blue eye mask sticker. On the Gundam style head there, you can see it kind of poking down underneath this like head guard piece on the front. Sticker 2 is going to be on the standard Vigna Ghina style head for a chrome sticker that goes behind the clear blue visor. Sticker 3 you get 2 of. They're going to be for the front head camera there, that thin blue strip. You get 1 for the Gundam style head, 1 for the Vigna Ghina style head. Sticker 4 you are not going to be able to use if you decide to swap the heads just to see which one you like better, because it is a gray and metallic blue sticker that kind of presses into the back of the head there for this gray detail that I painted in using a Display gray paint marker. So that sticker will kind of press into the divot there. I don't know how we can see that. And there's going to be a clear blue part that you're going to cover up with a metallic blue strip for that sticker. So because the 2 halves of the head here that form that back camera, you will need to like take it apart and then put it back together if you decide to swap which style head you're going to use. That sticker is really not going to stay there once you take the head apart. So yeah, that is definitely something I would recommend you painting yourself. So I used Display's gray paint marker for the outside, and I used Display's metallic blue paint marker for the strip in the middle, although you really can't see it with how recessed it is in there. It's kind of hard to get light in there to reflect off of it. So sticker 4, the gray part is only going to be for the inside of that tiny raised detail in the middle of that overall gray detail. Sticker 5 is going to be wrapping around the back of the head for this larger gray detail on the outside. Again, painted that in with a Display gray paint marker. Sticker 6 and 8 I did not use. They're going to be for the sides of the front skirts here for this gray and black thruster unit on the sides of the skirts. I used Display's Mecha yellow paint marker and the Gundam Real Touch black paint marker to get those in, and it turned out okay. So yeah, that's definitely something I would recommend you painting yourself, because otherwise you need to kind of fold the thruster sticker around that detail and press the black part in, and it's going to look pretty terrible, I would think. Sticker 7 is going to be for this yellow elongated trapezoid detail here that's going to fit in the top of the crotch. That just kind of slot into a little detail in the part, so that was fine. I just ended up using that sticker. Stickers 9 and 10 I did not use. They're going to be for the gray details here on the side skirts, so the stickers are just going to wrap around the outside of the front detail in there. You will need to paint in the inside of the side skirts in gray. Again, use Display's gray paint marker for that. Sticker 11 you get 2 of. I did not end up using them. They are going to be for the thruster details here on the back of the VSBRs. It's going to be a yellow sticker that kind of presses into this detail here, which will look pretty bad. So I just painted that in using a Display Mecha yellow paint marker. Sticker 12 I did end up using. It's going to be kind of hard to see, but they're on the tops of the VSBRs there. You can see there's a little yellow rectangle here near the front of the VSBR. So yeah, you get 2 of them, 1 for each side. That is just another sticker that you kind of press into a geometric detail there. That looks fine, so I ended up using that. Sticker 13 you get 2 of for the metallic blue sensors there on each of the VSBRs. And then stickers 14 and 15 are going to be used on the beam rifle here. Sticker 14 is this really tiny blue strip in the front of the beam rifle, and sticker 15 is going to be for the longer blue strip for the main camera sensor of the beam rifle. So yeah, plenty of color correcting stickers, and that does not cover everything I painted in myself. So apart from the details I mentioned that I painted in instead of using the color correcting stickers for, what you'll need to paint in if you want this kit to be color accurate is, in the shoulders, these extra thrusters here kind of sticking out from the shoulder, the insides need to be in yellow. Again, use Display's Mecha yellow paint marker for that. On the sides of the torso, there's going to be a sub thruster on each side that needs to be painted in yellow and black. Again, use Display's Mecha yellow paint marker and Gundam's Real Touch black marker for that. In the side of the beam shield kind of unit here projecting off of the arm, each of these small details in the sides of the shield need to be painted in yellow. Use Display's Mecha yellow paint marker. In the knees, these thrusters, while the gray part is part separated, poking through the knee armor there, the inside needs to be painted in yellow, so I used Display's Mecha yellow paint marker for that. For these tiny circle thrusters that I mentioned that were part separated very nicely off the runner, as you might expect, the inside does need to be painted in yellow and black. Again, use Display's Mecha yellow paint marker and the Gundam black Real Touch marker for that. On these thrusters on the insides of the leg armor, again, yellow and black, use the same markers I've mentioned a half dozen times already to paint those in. In the feet, these little sub-thrusters on the top of the feet also need to be in yellow and black. These large thrusters on the outsides of the legs need to be painted in yellow and black. On the backpack, these large thrusters here need to be painted in yellow and black on the inside. These two tiny thrusters here near the top of the backpack need to be painted in yellow. These other either ventilation or thruster details on the Vespers need to have a yellow kind of border around the inside. It's such a small detail that was a little bit difficult to get to, so it does look a little bit sloppy in certain parts, but I think from a distance on the shelf, I'm not really going to notice it. The insides of the barrels of the Vespers, again, need to be painted in yellow around the inside of the barrel. And then in these three thrusters on each of the legs, the insides need to be painted in yellow and black. So again, use Disc-Base Mecha Yellow paint marker and Gundam Real Touch Black for that. So yeah, a ton of small detail painting you are going to have to do on your part, mostly for the insides of thruster details and things like that. While some of them I would not expect to be color separated, like these tiny details in the beam shield unit there, some of them, like the larger thrusters on the backpack and the sides of the legs, I did expect to be color separated. They've done it before in 1/100 scale kits. A little bit disappointed they didn't do it here. As for my opinions on this design, I do really like the design of the Vigna Zirah here, although I question how much of a reason it is to get this kit when it kind of feels like a mishmash between the Vigna Ghina 1 and 2, and especially for the elevated price of this kit coming in at $52, where the other two kits I was a little bit wrong in the unboxing section. I checked after the fact. Both the Vigna Ghina 1 and 2 retail for around $38, so I think the extra price for this kit isn't necessarily the most worth it unless you're super into this design in particular, which does feel like kind of an in-between of the Vigna Ghina 1 and 2, especially with the Gundam style head, with the Vigna Ghina 2's head very much resembling the Gundam F91. This one feels like an in-between of a traditional Gundam head and the Vigna Ghina's head, which it kind of is, especially with only the core unit being swapped out between the two different options here. But I do really love the way this kit looks, with the very varied look of this kit, with a ton of detail, especially on the Vespers, poking, with these little gray details poking through on the sides. All of the little thrusters just molded all over this kit to emphasize its use as a high mobility space unit really helps kind of, again, sell that this kit is a very nimble, quick unit meant to be used in space. I also really like the color scheme being a dark gray, red, and yellow, which does work very well, but again, that's something that the Vigna Ghina II has, and a lot of the armor details that I find particularly interesting, like the power piping and the thrusters in the shoulders and things like that, are also shared with the Vigna Ghina II. So if you like a lot of details in this kit but don't really want to pay the P-Bandai markup, whether through resellers, which of course I will always recommend against doing, or from US P-Bandai themselves, which is like 25% more expensive than the retail releases of the Vigna Ghina 1 and 2, I recommend you pick up either the Vigna Ghina 1, which got reprinted fairly recently and have been shipped to stores for the past few months in the States, or keep a lookout for the Vigna Ghina II, which has not been reprinted for a while, but who shares a lot of design language with this. Of course, if you don't really want to wait, this kit is available on P-Bandai in the currently shipping section, although it has been marked up to, I think, $58, which is pretty expensive for what you get here. But yeah, I do really love the way this kit looks, all of the varied geometry, all of the extra thrusters, especially the ones poking out the sides of the legs, making it look very much like a prototype, like they were mishmashing ideas together just to see how well they would work before they would like touch them up in a more refined mass production model. But yeah, really like how this kit looks, really like some of the weirder parts of it, like the beam shield there kind of sticking out from that tripod off of the forearm. All of it's just very interesting to me, and I really like how it looks. Of course, for a quick size comparison, here's the RE100 Vigna Zirah, next to a standard size Tiger being the High Grade Blue Destiny Unit 1, and a standard size Master Grade being the Master Grade Gem Sniper 2 White Dingo team. So as you can see here, the Vigna Zirah, being a late UC kit hailing from the F91 era, is going to stand in between your standard High Grade and your standard Master Grade in size. I think in Universe, this mobile suit only stands at like 15.5 meters tall or something like that compared to the usual 18-meter tall Gundam. So yeah, this kit will be taking up less height on your shelf, but just keep in mind with this rather thick backpack, it will take up more depth-wise space on your shelf than your typical 1/100 scale kit. For your accessories, here's the RE100 Vigna Zirah with everything it comes with. Of course, starting as per usual with your hand options, you are going to be getting the two standard holding hands you see on the kit right now for use with the beam sabers, and you will get this trigger finger here only for the right side for use with the beam rifle. So yeah, a little bit lacking on hand option parts. Getting into your adapters, you will of course only get this adapter here for mounting it onto an action base. This will just slide onto the bottom of the kit as per usual. For your melee options, you will get the two beam sabers stored on a rack on the backstory, as you can see there. Not the most convenient things to get it. You will have to take off the entire rack to remove the beam sabers for use, but they will tab into the hands for a fairly secure grip. For use with the beam sabers, you will get these two beam saber effect parts here. I double checked after the unboxing section. I don't remember if I said these were standard 1/100 scale beam saber effect parts. They are not. They are standard 1/44 scale beam saber effect parts, which does make sense given the rather small stature of these late UC kits. For your other beam effect, you will of course get the beam shield here, which does look quite nice. To use it, you will just pop off the outer part of the beam shield there poking out of the arm, slot this there, and then sandwich the part back on to show it deploying the beam shield. You'll see that in the posing section. For your ranged handheld option, you will get this beam rifle here, which did come on a new runner unique to the Vigna Zirah, but I believe in mold this is pretty much identical to the standard Vigna Ghina I beam rifle, which I do like the look of quite a bit. I do like this very large kind of drum here that sits in the middle of the beam rifle, this like really a nice power piping detail, again molded onto the bottom of the beam rifle there. So yeah, that does look quite nice, although there is a rather nasty seam line running down the middle of this weapon because it is just two halves sandwiched together. So yeah, apart from that, not really much to say. There's a secondary handle here that can be deployed like so, but otherwise it's a fairly normal beam rifle. And then of course you will get these standard Vigna Ghina style head here, which you'll see in the posing section. Of course, you'll need to basically disassemble the entire head in order to put this one on, and that was a little bit of a pain because I originally had to assemble with the Vigna Ghina head, just like decal and top coat and everything, and then swapped it out for the Gundam style head before I started filming, and the pegs that hold the whole head together, that the two main halves of the head sandwiched together around the center unit, are very fragile. So the top pegs actually did end up snapping off inside of their sockets when I disassembled the head. So yeah, just be very careful if you want to take apart the head and reconfigure it as either the standard Vigna Ghina style or the Gundam style head, because those pegs are very fragile. They do tend to break very easily, and that does make it a bit of a pain to reassemble it. So yeah, a fairly basic accessory spread, but it does include most of what you would expect this kit to. Maybe something like a beam launcher, and definitely other hand options like an open expressive hand would be nice, but apart from that, this kit does come with what you would expect it to. So getting into articulation now, starting as per usual with the head for an upward look. The kit can get a very slight upward look, mostly because of how far the back of the head kind of extends down. It does end up colliding with the collar very easily. For a downward look, the kit can look down almost into its own chest. You get some moderate side to side tilt, and of course you can 360 the head about the ball joint. In the arms then, in terms of shoulder swing, you get a fairly nice almost 45-degree shoulder swing before this very thick shoulder armor will collide with the torso. This thruster unit that extends out from the shoulder can articulate upwards independently of the rest of the shoulder. The shoulder armor can articulate upwards independently of the arm to facilitate. A 90-degree side arm raise, a little bit underwhelming. You can, of course, 360 the arm in its socket. Just be very careful because of how thick the Vespers are in the backpack that you don't get any collision there. The top of the arm can, of course, 360. A single bend in the elbow will only give you a 135-degree elbow bend, and the wrist is on a ball joint, which will do ball joint things. In the torso then, for a forward ab crunch, you get a moderate forward ab crunch. For a backwards ab crunch, you get a slight backwards ab crunch, which I am fine with the very large backpack there, although the weight did end up not being that big of a deal in terms of the balance of the kit, but it may become an issue with the polycaps in the torso as you have this kit assembled for a while. You get some minor side to side tilt, and of course, you can 360 the torso in its socket. Just with how much stuff there is going on in the backpack and everything, it does tend to get caught and pop out very easily. In the backpack then, these thrusters in the back do have a bit of play, so you can tilt them up and down as you would want. For the Vespers themselves, they can of course swing down on an arm, kind of fit underneath the arm there when they are in use, and when you want to show the kit actually you firing off the Vespers, this part here will flip up. There's a handle inside the Vesper that will pop out, and you'll just slot the hand onto the handle like so, and you'll have your Vigna Ghina firing off the Vespers, which you'll see in the posing section. And that's probably how you're going to want to pose this kit on your shelf, given that that's kind of the unique thing with this kit, that it actually has functional Vespers as opposed to the Vigna Ghina II, which had just like the look of the Vespers, but they were just thrusters. In the waist then, your front skirts can flip up a full 180 degrees with some very nice molded detail on the underside of the skirts. These side skirts can tilt up and out a little bit on a ball joint. Just be very careful that it doesn't pop out of its socket, which it tends to do very easily. Although I don't really think you would want to articulate it, especially when it forms this kind of continuous shape with the back skirt. That does look quite nice. And of course your back skirt is going to be fixed in place. For your legs then, there is a track that the hips can slide on individually for a hip swing gimmick. Yep, there it is, the leg popping off very easily there. Again, be very careful when you articulate this kit. For your front kicks then, with the hip swing activated, you can get a 90-degree front kick. You can get just about a 90-degree side kick. And by articulating the hip swing, you can get a 45-degree back kick. So nothing too crazy going on in the leg articulation. Again, that leg does pop off very easily. The leg popped off before the actual ball would slide along the track in the waist, which is a little bit annoying. In the legs then, you will of course get full 360 rotation about the peg, but again, those legs pop off very easily, so be careful as you articulate them. A single bend in the knee will give you about a 135-degree bend in the knee, which, yeah, you should be expecting with how thick this lower leg armor is. The thrusters in the lower legs do also have a bit of play similar to the backpack, so you can't tilt them as you wish. This very large ankle armor piece can move up a little bit, but as you can see, it does not stay up, it will just drop back down. In the feet, then, there is no heel-toe separation. For overall toe dips, you get a fairly decent toe dip. For overall toe raises, you get a very nice overall toe raise. For your side-to-side pivot, you get some very minor inward pivot and even less outward pivot as you might expect from this very large bit of leg armor protruding down at the side. In terms of foot rotation, you get basically nothing. So yeah, a little bit unfortunate there. So overall, the articulation on the Vigna Zirah is fairly underwhelming, with single jointed elbows and knees being a little bit unfortunate, and articulation in the feet in particular being a little bit disappointing, which might end up limiting your ground posing, but that's kind of to be expected with this kit being a nimble, kind of space-borne mobile suit. You would want to have this kit posed in the air. Speaking of which, let's see this kit in some poses. Alright, so here's the RE100 Vigna Zirah in a spin here, starting with usual running and gunning pose, and before I get started, first off, one, just note that this is reconfigured to use the standard style Vigna Ghina head, like I said I was going to do earlier. Two, you may notice that the rear boosters are a little bit misaligned in certain poses. I only noticed this after I finished filming all of them, but because the top booster in the back of the leg is linked to the assembly that has the knee joint, as you articulate the knee bend, it also misaligns that booster from the other two thrusters on the back of the leg. So it's very easy to get that out of sync, and it may look a little bit awkward, so that is just something you're going to want to pay attention to if you get this kit, or I think both the Vigna Ghina and Vigna Ghina II have the same thing. I'll have to double check, but yeah, that's just something to keep in mind if you decide to build this kit or the kits that it's based on. And three, you may notice that the decals on this kit in between poses may get damaged or go missing, but that's because, especially in the legs, with that loose polycap joint from the peg going into the hip down into the leg being so loose, the legs kept falling off and like clattering to the floor, which caused the decals to get a bit damaged. I use aqueous top coat, which is a little bit less robust than other top coat options out there, so yeah, it doesn't protect the decals as well, and they got damaged over time while I was filming this kit. So yeah, if you decide to use aqueous top coat with a kit like this, just probably pick one pose and keep it in it. Don't really experiment like I am, because that increases the odds of things falling apart and damaging the kit. I can kind of ramble about that a little bit longer than usual here because there isn't much to say about this pose. It looks pretty awful. The lack of lateral ankle mobility means your ground posing is going to be incredibly limited. There is a two-handed beam rifle pose you'll see later that does look pretty awful because of that, so this looks really awkward on the ground in motion like this. I would not consider posing this kit on my shelf without an action base, except for maybe the next pose. So getting this kit crouching here with the VSBRs deployed, here it is, and for the lack of lateral ankle articulation, it is made up for a little bit in the longitudinal ankle articulation, where it is able to kind of extend the ankle down far enough to have this kind of natural kneeling pose, with the very large knee armor also providing a pretty stable base for the back leg for it to look fairly convincing kneeling. And it also looks really great with the VSBRs here. Again, this kind of pose really emphasizes the power of the weapons, where it needs to have a more stable grounded pose in order to kind of brace itself before it fires its heavy ordnance. So the VSBRs do look really great here. I don't think they look as good as something like the Master Grade F91 2.0's VSBRs, but that might just be me being a little bit biased because I love the F91's design. The VSBRs here do look a little bit odd with how thin they are relative to the very large size of them, especially with how they become kind of bulbous at the base where they connect into the arms going into the backpack. But there's a bit of a positive trade-off here, where with the F91, while I really like how the VSBRs look, it was a giant pain in the ass to get the hands to actually grip the triggers for the VSBRs of the F91. Here it was incredibly easy to get the hands into position around the grips for the VSBRs here. The hands just kind of slot down onto the handles, the arms maneuver in a very natural way to kind of accommodate this, and it looks natural while it's doing so. So yeah, if you're going to get this kit over the Vigna Ghina 1 or 2, it would definitely be to use the VSBRs, and I do think that it is a very nice posing option. It looks great with it. I might even consider having it in this kind of low kneeling pose on the shelf if I need to take its stand to give to another kit, because this does look fairly convincing and it looks alright. But of course, this kit is a high mobility space mobile suit, so you're probably going to want to pose it in the air. Here it is on my action base 4 here, charging through the air with the beam shield deployed and the beam saber at the ready. So Yeah, this shows off a few things. One, while the kit does look pretty good in the air, especially with all of the thrusters and the proportions and things like that really lending itself to mid-air posing, this kit's articulation doesn't really fare the best, mainly because, again, of that loose peg in the legs. So I didn't really notice it until after I'd finished filming, but the leg is in a different position than it was when I had first set it up on the stand in front of the camera. That's because the leg droops fairly easily. You really need to press the leg into that peg to get it to not droop, and even then, if you adjust the leg even slightly, it'll loosen enough on that peg that it will droop. So yeah, the leg articulation in the air is a little bit underwhelming because of that looseness in the polycap going from the peg down into the leg. Honestly, that might be something you would want to thicken up with the disc bay joint strengthening pen or something like that, or some masking tape, or just something to kind of thicken up that peg and get it to hold onto the polycap in the thigh a little bit better, because as it is right now, the connection is quite loose, and that does really limit how natural your poses will look in the air, because I think especially if you do things like flaring out the Vespers on the back to demonstrate their ability as thrusters, have the Vigna Zirah kind of lean into whatever it's doing in the air, like most of the late UC kits, you can get a really convincing, interesting, high mobility pose in the air. So yeah, if you're not going to have it crouching on the ground, doing something like this, but a little bit more convincing after you fix up the peg going down into the leg, would be how I would want to have the Vigna Zirah, and I think with a high mobility, nimble mobile suit like this, the Beam Saber is a decent option to pose it with, and it does look pretty good with that Beam Shield, although, as you might expect with how large it is and how large the shoulder armor is, it does limit your arm articulation considerably. So while your options are limited, I think most of the things you can pull off with the Beam Shield in the air do look pretty good. So getting into the air in this kind of aggressive charging forward pose, firing out the beam rifle with the Beam Shield out, I'm just going to leave this up while I get into the conclusion of this kit, because there isn't really much to say. I think the beam rifle looks alright, but if you wanted to pose this kit with the beam rifle, you probably would have gotten the RE100 Vigna Ghina I. So in conclusion, the RE100 Vigna Zirah is a pretty interesting model kit, building off of a relatively solid base of the RE100 Vigna Ghina and Vigna Ghina II. In terms of the build, this kit is rather pleasant, although being an RE100, it does fall short of other 1/100 offerings like the full mechanics line, and especially the master grade line. If you're getting this kit, do not expect that level of robustness in terms of the build. The inner frame is rather lacking in various areas. However, the layering of exterior armor is a very pleasant surprise, especially in parts like the shoulders, where the boosters on the front and back of the shoulders are part separated, the power piping are separated details, the gray frame poking out of the Vespers on the sides are separate details, the tiny little sub-thrusters on the sides of the legs are separate details, the exterior attention to detail is really excellent in terms of part separation, and for the most part, I can't really be too mad about the parts you'll need to paint in yourself, because it does feel like they part separated out most of what they were able to. In terms of aesthetics, this is going to be one of the main selling points of this kit, being a kind of hybrid between the Vigna Ghina I and II, taking the color scheme and various armor details of the Vigna Ghina II with most of the arsenal as well as the head of the Vigna Ghina I, though you can swap it out to be a kind of hybrid of the two, again with that Gundam style head. Not the biggest fan of that, but if you want it, it's there. However, you do need to keep in mind that there is a rather large color correcting sticker sheet that comes with this kit that is pretty annoying, with many of these stickers pressing into geometric details and folding over details and things like that will look not very natural and will be pretty annoying to apply, so I would recommend you paint in those details yourself. In terms of painting then, there are a ton of small details all over this kit you'll need to paint in yourself, mostly going to be the insides of thrusters and things like that. So while for the very tiny sub thrusters on the sides of the legs and in the insides of the knees, I can forgive you need to paint that in because those are fairly small details. For larger thrusters like the ones on the backpack and the ones on the sides of the legs, they have color separated the insides of those thrusters in 1/100 scale models before, and I'm a little bit disappointed they didn't do so here. So there is a ton of painting you're going to have to do for this kit. The main color you are going to need if you want to paint in all of the color inaccurate details of this kit yourself is of course going to be a standard Gundam yellow. You're going to need a black to fill in the kind of void details on the thrusters and things like that, and if you want to replace some of the color correcting stickers, you will also need a gray and a metallic blue. So not too bad, but it is a lot of small detail painting that is a little bit annoying to do, especially with so much of this kit being as nicely color separated as it is, but a lot of the details I can forgive just for how small they are and how difficult they would be to fully part separate. In terms of accessories then, this is the other main reason you would want to pick this kit up. Not for any of its handheld accessories, which are fairly standard and are fairly lacking in terms of your hand option parts, but in terms of the one unique weapon this kit has, being the Vespers on the back. While the Vigna Ghina II did have Vesper-like structures on the back, they were just boosters that were designed to look like Vespers and act in ambac maneuvering and things like that, and don't actually have any weapons built into them. This kit, on the other hand, does have fully functional Vespers that can swing down underneath the arms and be used as heavy ordnance, which is where this kit looks best in my opinion, and is going to be the main thing you want this kit pose doing on the shelf, because if you're going to have it using the beam saber and beam shield or the beam rifle, you're probably better off picking up the Vigna Ghina I, and if you want a very unique handheld weapon, you're probably better off waiting for a Vigna Ghina II reprint for that thing's large lance. So if you're not going to use the VSBRs, the accessory spread here is rather lacking and doesn't really give much unique to the Vigna Zirah, and especially is lacking in hand options. But the included ability to swap between the two different styles of head for this kit is pretty cool, and does give you a little bit of variety in how you want to display this kit on your shelf. In terms of articulation, this is where this kit kind of does really fall apart. Particularly in grounded poses, you are very limited in your options due to the very limited lateral foot movement, meaning that this kit really struggles to maintain balance or look natural in any kind of grounded pose, as you should have seen the wide-legged grounded pose two-handing the beam rifle looked pretty awful just because of, again, the lack of side foot articulation really limiting how you're able to position the legs. And to keep this kit balanced, you really need to have the leg almost at a 90-degree angle, which looks really awkward in a grounded pose. And in the air, your leg posing is also fairly limited because of the looseness that I mentioned earlier, with the peg going from the joint that connects into the hip down into the thigh. That connection is rather loose. Again, I would recommend you thicken up that peg with something like a layer of glue, a joint strengthening pen, a bit of masking tape, just anything to make that connection a little bit more secure. Because without it, your leg is going to be rather loose, it will fall off, that damages like the top coat and the decals, and it's just kind of a pain to deal with. So yeah, if you decide to get this kit, definitely something to fix up, but yeah, your articulation in the lower body is fairly limited. In the upper body, it's decent, but nothing too spectacular, so poseability isn't exactly one of this kit's strong points. So would I recommend the RE100 Vigna Zirah? Not really. Unless you really want to have a Vigna Ghina type kit with VSBRs, this is definitely something I would say you can safely skip out on. If the idea of this kit interests you, but again, with the highly elevated price tag, that kind of turns you off a little bit, and nothing this kit has is too unique or valuable to you in what it has, then I would definitely recommend either the RE100 Vigna Ghina, which is readily available in many of the major online US retailers right now for $38, which is, I think, reasonable for what you get in the box. Is much more of a generalist poser, or wait for the Vigna Ghina II to get a reprint, which is much closer to this kit in terms of appearance, and has a much more unique arsenal in the rather large lance it has. So yeah, again, unless you really want to have a Vigna Ghina type suit with the VSBRs, or you're very much a fan of specifically the Vigna Zirah and not the Vigna Ghina 1 or 2, I would say this is definitely a kit you can safely skip out on. So that was my review of the RE100 Vigna Zirah. What do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, make sure to sub the notification bell. If you like this video, give it a like. And I'll see you next time with a bit of an odd kit that I wasn't expecting to actually come out. The R3 Aura Battler Bilbine, which I don't remember when the last R3 kit came out. It was like 10 years ago or something, but yeah, I was not expecting that line to get revived, and I'm very excited to take a look at that kit, so I'll see you then.